Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of my video series on indicators. In part 1, I covered all of the specialized indicators that I own, such as coaxial or centering indicators, thickness gauges that have indicators built into them, hole gauges, bore gauges, and a couple of other unusual indicators. In episode 2, I'm going to focus on what is typically called a dial indicator, or sometimes referred to as a drop indicator. So before I get into those, I want to do a quick explanation of the two main types of indicators that you tend to come across, and that almost everybody who's going to be involved in machine shop operations should own at least one of each of this type, in my opinion. So I'd say the two most common types of indicators are going to be this style here, which is called a dial indicator and sometimes referred to as a drop indicator. And then the second style is what's referred to as a test indicator. And the test indicator has this small arm that operates on a pivot point. So you can see it operates quite a bit differently. And there are certain applications where this indicator will be very handy, where this indicator will not be able to be used at all. But for the purposes of today's episode, we're going to focus on these dial indicators. So let's get all of these other indicators out of the way, and let's talk dial indicators. So this is my current collection of dial indicators. Dial indicators come in all different sorts of sizes, and they also have several different variations, and I'll show some examples of those in a moment. First, let's talk about the size, the dial size. The most typical dial size that you tend to see in these indicators is this size right here. This is a 2-inch diameter dial. However, you also run across some oddities, like, for instance, this little one here. You can see, compared to the 2-inch one, it appears to be a 1-inch dial. Not very common. I haven't seen too many of these. And then those big ones you see in the back there, and these big sterrets in the front here, these are 3.5-inch dials. And those I think are really neat. Especially if your eyes are a little bit older, like mine are. That might be something that might be handy for those with the vision issues. Let's talk about variations. Some indicators, like this one right here, are really basic. They do not have any subdials, which I'll explain a subdial in a moment, and they actually only tend to measure, they're really only made ideally for measuring in one direction, and they don't tend to have a ton of travel. For instance, the complete range of travel on this indicator is only 25 thousandths. But what it does have going for it is that this is a 10th thousandths indicator. In other words, each one of these divisions accounts for 1/10,000th of an inch. So this indicator has to move from, say, 0 to 1 before you get to 1/1000th of an inch. This is also a very basic indicator, but if you notice on this indicator, there's actually, the numbers go up in one direction only halfway around the scale, and then they actually start going back down again. So it goes from 0 up to 50, and it goes back down 50, 40. And the reason why this indicator does that is because this indicator, you can preload this indicator and then rotate the bezel to 0 it, and then that allows you to make an easy reading of whether it's 10 thousandths below or 10 thousandths above, for example. So that's kind of handy. I mean, that's not to say you couldn't do that with this one also. It's just that you're going to actually be, looking at, well, when it goes from 2 to 1, for instance, that's 1,000th, okay, below. whereas you can take more of a direct, immediate reading with this type of dial. Some indicators, because of their nature, are able to have a much longer travel, and so oftentimes those indicators will have a subdial. You see this little dial here within the dial is called a subdial, and what happens here is for every one full revolution that this large dial makes, that subdial will move one. So this is a thousandths indicator. If I push on this so that the dial comes around exactly 100 thousandths back to 0, you'll notice that the subdial is now pointing at 1. And if I do it again, it goes to 2, and so on, all the way up to 1 inch. Here's a Brown and Sharp indicator that has a subdial, and they do it a little bit differently. The subdial is actually almost like an hour hand on a clock. So that's kind of a neat variation. I kind of like that. Some indicators that have an even larger travel will have 2 subdials. This big Starrett, for instance, has 2 subdials. This is a 10 thousandths indicator, and for every one full revolution of the large hand, that little subdial will move ahead 1 division. But also, you'll notice there's a second subdial right there. The full movement, range of movement on this indicator is 200 thousandth. So you'll see that first line there on that second subdial, it says 0.1. So once it gets to that point, that's 100 thousandths of travel. And when it gets to the 2, that's going to be 200 thousandths of travel. Some indicators are designed to have even more travel. This large Starrett indicator has a full 3 inches of travel and 2 subdials. An indicator like this is really handy for mounting adjacent to your lathe carriage, for instance, and that way you can actually as you move your carriage, you can actually move it over exactly 2 inches to a point and then back to 0. So it's sort of like having a poor man's travadial. So I brought out this little group right here and separated it from the rest of the flock, so to speak, because I wanted to talk about this group here. I would call this my mongrel group. And by mongrel, I mean that these are unusual brand names. These are not typical of what you might find when you're buying a used indicator. But by no means does that mean that these are the inferior quality. I'll get to that group in a moment, because there's plenty of inferior quality gauges that have brand names. So we'll get to that in a moment, but right now let's look at some of these. Let's start with this one right here. This is a little bit larger than the standard 2-inch size, and this is made by the Heald Company of the USA. I don't know where in the USA they were made. This indicator has a place in my heart, only because this is the first indicator I ever owned. I bought this way back. I bought a small green metal toolbox that had, it wasn't even a machinist toolbox, but it had some machinist items in it, and this little cloth bag right here was in the bottom, and this is what was wrapped up inside there, this Heald indicator. This is a thousandths indicator. This thing is kind of clunky sounding, but it still works perfectly fine. But it's probably not an indicator I'm going to hold on to. It's really heavy and solid too. That's the other thing about this indicator. I'll give it that. So again, it's Heald, H-E-A-L-D. This indicator right up here on the front, this is a Toyo indicator. So Toyo is the tubular micrometer tubular micrometer company. Actually, it says tubular micrometer company right on the face of James, Minnesota. So this is an interesting indicator only because of the fact that I've never seen an indicator by this company. This is an interesting indicator. This is made by a company called the Randall and Stickney Company of Waltham, Massachusetts. So that was made right here in my home state of Massachusetts. But again, I'm not familiar with this name. I venture to guess that this is a company that is no longer in business or was maybe absorbed by another company. I don't know. This is also seems like a really well-made, solid indicator. It's got quite a bit of heft to it for a small indicator like this. Works perfectly fine, but I think it's going to be relegated more to a collectible maybe. This indicator here is made by the Ames Company, A-M-E-S. This company is also Waltham, Massachusetts. This indicator works perfectly fine. I think I have seen other indicators with this name, though. Now, the interesting thing on the back here is that this is actually somebody engraved Fay Scott, Leland. Now, what's striking to me is I think Fay Scott, isn't that another manufacturer's name? In other words, instead of engraving it with Leland G might be the original owner's name, but the Fay Scott, that kind of rings a bell for some other reason. These two little indicators are pretty much almost identical. They're a little sticky, but they still operate. And these are both marked Baty, B-A-T-Y. So I don't think it's batty. They're unusual because of their small size. They also have this unusual back on them. Here's another small indicator. This one is made by the John Bull Company. So this would be an English company, I believe. Yeah, this says John Bull British Indicator Company, made in England. Look how small the numbers are. Makes that one a little bit more of a challenge to read. Again, this indicator might be maybe pretty common in England, but it's certainly not common here in the U.S. I don't think even on the U.S. eBay site I've seen hardly any of these pop up. These next two indicators right here are a bit of a mystery to me. They're both clearly marked made in the USA. They're both thousandth indicators. The way that these actually show that they're thousandths indicators is a little bit different. They actually have a 1/1000 fraction, and they say made in the United States of America. So these are probably pretty decent quality. They're definitely early. This one looks like it may have been apart more than once. It's interesting kind of washers here. Those don't look right. Yeah, I'd say this one's been apart. But I may never know who made these. And the last one here is a Standard Gauge Company indicator, made by Standard Gauge Company of Poughkeepsie, New York. And I don't see too many of these around either. This one looks like it was somewhere where maybe the heat, something too warm, got up against the plastic here. There's kind of a ridge right here. This next group indicators here, I would classify these as the bargain or budget indicators. They tend to be Asian manufacturers for the most part, and they'll appear under several different names. This one right here is an Enco, branded as an Enco, but it's made in Japan. This is actually in a very good condition, though. This indicator right here is marked Tech Lock, and it's from the Tech Lock Corporation. But in very, very small print down below, you can also see it says Japan. So this is also made in Japan. This one's also in very good condition, even though it's a cheaper indicator. This one, oddly enough, I actually even have the original box for it. But when I bought this one from the estate, I bought this indicator just the way you find it. You see it right here with this number 644 attachment on it, which is handy. So I will probably take that off and save that, keep it for myself, and I'll put this indicator back in the original box, which is right here. The reason why I didn't have it in this box is because what was in this box was a better indicator. It was actually a Toyo, which I'll show you in a little bit. There's another common name in the Asian import market, Phase 2. This one is marked Made in China down below over here. So that's an even cheaper one. Here's another one, pretty much the same thing. Also Phase 2, Made in China. Here's another cheap import branded one. This one's branded Shars, another cheap manufacturer name that you tend to see on a lot of Chinese import stuff. This one's also marked Made in China. This has got a nice extension on it. I'll probably save that extension for myself. Next up are these 4 SPI indicators. Now SPI stands for Swiss Precision Instruments, which is a bit of a misnomer because a lot of the items that are marketed under the SPI name are actually cheap imports. They're Asian imports that carry the SPI name. So they have an air of sounding like they're, Swiss made precision instruments when in fact they aren't. But there are other instances where they're not necessarily that bad. I'll give you an example, a case in point. This SPI indicator right here is marked Made in Japan, right down there in the lower corner. Oddly enough, though, I have not one, but 3 more SPI indicators that are marked Made in Germany. The difference on these is that below the SPI, there's another name. I can't quite make it out. It looks like almost a German name. See if I can't figure out what the letters are. This one is missing the bezel is cracked, and it's missing the crystal. So I might be able to see this one better. This one's also got some other issues. That's a pretty sick indicator. This is a nice, pretty heavy-duty feeling SPI indicator with a sub-dial. Also made in Germany, also marked with that name. Yes, I don't know, I might hold on to this one. Calibrated back in 1995. So this next group here is most of my federal indicators that I own, with the exception of the oversized face ones, which I'll get to in a moment. These indicators right here, I would consider many of these to actually be of very good quality, and a lot of people might not agree with that. And I think the reason is because over the years, Federal has gone through so many changes and have put out so many indicators. I would venture to guess that at any given time they were possibly outsourcing their indicators to other companies. I don't know. But I do know that some of these indicators I have here are quite old and still work very well. I do notice that on many of these indicators, these older ones that seem to have nicer, more fluid, precision feeling movements, they tend to have this mark on them down here. It says Miracle Movement. So I'm not sure if that was a series at some point or what the story is there, but this says Federal, Providence, Rhode Island, USA, which is where the headquarters is still located. But as far as where this was manufactured, I'm not positive that this was manufactured in Rhode Island or not. But may very well have been. You know, it's not in the greatest looking shape. Got a lot of the powder coating is missing. Got some rust on there, but it actually still works quite well. The other thing I noticed that on some of these Federals is that on some of them they mention that they're fully jeweled. And what that means, fully jeweled, means that the tiny bearings that are inside the movement that the little tiny shafts rotate in are actually made out of jewels, typically a type of ruby, if I'm not mistaken. And that gives them extra durability because you don't have a situation where you have metal on metal wear over time. Watch movements often have jeweled bearings in them, and of course the more places that they use them inside the movement, generally speaking, the higher quality the movement. So fully jeweled would tend to indicate that all of the pivot points in here are running through jeweled bearings. So this one here is not marked that way, but this one, notice this one says Federal Products Corp., Providence, Rhode Island, USA, just like the other one. It also says Miracle Movement, but this one, right below the needle there, you can actually see where it says fully jeweled. And that's also, you know, it's been around, it's missing coating, it's got some rust on it, and still works great. This one here is another Miracle Movement model. This one, this contraption right here is actually for tramming the head on my milling machine, and I did not make this. This actually, somebody made this, and it came with, when I bought my milling machine, there was a cabinet with tooling in it, and this was in there. So I haven't done anything to change this. This is exactly the way that I received it, and I think what I'd like to do is maybe change this indicator at some point to another one. This one's fully jeweled. This one has a very strong spring in it. I'm wondering whether or not somebody modified this. But anyways, this is a good example of why someone would need, you know, more than one of these dial indicators. Well, because you might want to build something like this, and then that's going to tie up one of your dial indicators for a dedicated job like this, and you just leave it like that all the time. And so that's it's a good idea to have more than one on hand, because you never know when you might want to make something up like this. This pair of Federal indicators right here is kind of neat because they're branded with a company name, so they were probably made for this company by Federal. So this one on the right here, it's branded Delco Remy Division. Okay, Delco Remy was I believe a starter and alternator manufacturer. And this one here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's just the slightest ghost of the Carrier logo, and that would be the Carrier Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Company, judging by the look of it. So this is a little bit larger than the standard 2-inch dial face, and the other thing that's interesting about this one is that this one is marked 0.01 millimeter. So this is actually a metric indicator, and it's actually still works fine. Could stand to be cleaned up and maybe have a new crystal here, this plastic piece. And this one came with this magnet on it, which actually makes it kind of handy. So if I decide to sell this one, I'll probably steal that magnet for myself. Here's another one about the same size as that one. This one is a thousandths indicator. This one's marked fully jeweled. This one actually, it says the model D81S, I believe. And this has this very extra long rod somebody stuck on there. And this is an unusual one because it's a 1-inch diameter dial. The thing's a little sucker. And this one's marked Providence, USA, Miracle Movement, fully jeweled. And it's sticking a little bit, so it probably could use a little bit of TLC. See it unwinding there slowly. But that's kind of a neat one, just because it's so small. Next up, I'm going to show you my oversized, these are 3.5-inch diameter Federal indicators. I bought all of these out of the same estate. I actually have 4 of them, but I'm going to save the last one of those for the end of the video, because it's extra special. I would characterize it as probably the most beautiful example of craftsmanship in an indicator that I've ever seen, and you'll see why. For starters, let's take a look at these. This one here actually looks like just a large version of one of these old ones here. That's the like a 2-inch size, and that's like probably about 2.5. These are 3.5-inch. So this indicator also marked made in Providence, Rhode Island. And again, I should clarify, this says Federal Products Corporation of Providence, Rhode Island. It doesn't say it was made there, but I have to believe, because of the age, that it probably was actually made there. So this is also a full jeweled one. It's interesting, the side of the box here actually talks about branch offices. They have branch offices all over the world. Australia, Montreal, South Africa, England, Mexico, Central and South America, and of course all over the United States. Here's another one. This is a 1/2 thousandths indicator. Got a very large subdial on it also. And again, this one box is very similar to that one. This one's got a chrome finish on it, which is kind of neat. They went to the extra effort to chrome this one. And this one does not have a movable dial, which is strange. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe there is a set screw there. I wonder if you loosen that screw, whether or not this can be rotated. And this one's a little gummy. You can hear inside there. That could use some attention, some lubrication by the sounds of it. And then this one is a little bit different. This one has got that Miracle Movement, and it's marked full jeweled up here as opposed to around the center part there. This also has 2 subdials. Looks like this is a model E3BS-R2, and this is a 1/10 thousandths indicator. And this one looks like it's in excellent condition. This one does not appear to be suffering from the stickiness that the other 2 have. Even the box is different as far as the way it's marked up. This is marked right on it, Miracle Movement, Federal Dial Indicator. This is interesting down here. This says Federal Products Corporation, a subsidiary of Esterline Corporation, Providence, Rhode Island. And then here we get the Esterline logo. I might hold on to that one. So these next 2 indicators I would characterize as high quality. They're Toyos, both made in Japan. So this would be a exception to the rule of Asian imports being poor quality. I actually think these are good quality. This top one right here, you can see it's mounted on this surface gauge. This is exactly the way I got this indicator. This surface gauge and indicator was given to me by my friend George Russell, the radio personality from New Hampshire, on a visit to his place. I happened to spot this indicator, and I asked him about what he used it for, and he said, I think somebody had just given it to him, and he said, why don't you just take it? You can put it to better use than I could. And then I didn't even notice at the time, but then when I got it home and I was looking at it, turns out this is a metric one. It's actually 0.01 to 20 millimeter range. So that's actually, other than that one Federal that I showed you, this is only the second indicator I have that's metric. Now, I don't know if I'm going to have much of a use for that, but it's certainly something I'm going to hold on to because, like I said, I don't have a lot of metric indicators. So in the off chance I do run into a situation where I need a metric indicator, I'll have one. And not only that, but this was a gift from George, so I prize it just for that reason alone. This Toyo I bought out of an estate, and this looks brand new. I don't think this has ever been used, and this is exactly how I got this one. It was in this, let's see how clean that is. I think this is brand new, never used. It was in the foam pack just like this, exactly this way. But the interesting thing about this is that this was in this Tech-Lock box, but it came out of the same estate that I bought that Tech-Lock indicator from. So my theory is that this Tech-Lock indicator is actually what belongs in this box. And that makes sense too, because if you notice, there's a cutout area in the foam right here that is not necessary for this indicator, but is a perfect place for the other knob that locks the bezel on this one. But I just, knowing that this is a nicer indicator, wanted to keep it better protected, so I've been keeping it in this foam box. Well, I'm going to be selling this Tech-Lock indicator, and I'll sell it with the original box, and we'll just have to find a safe place to put this Toyo. Oh, and I almost missed it. I actually have a third Toyo, and oddly enough, this one does have a large protrusion here. I wonder if this is, oh, actually that looks like maybe that fits that. Huh. Well, I do have this other foam box for this phase 2, and this phase 2 really doesn't need any special treatment. All right, we're in the home stretch of part 2 here, and these I would characterize as probably my highest quality dial indicators that I have. When we get to the test indicators in the next part, I'll show you some even higher quality indicators. But these right here, as far as dial indicators go, these are going to be my top quality ones. Not necessarily the top condition. You can see that some of these look a little rough. Could use a little TLC. But these are Starrett indicators. These are all US made indicators, except for, actually I got the Brown and Sharp here. You can see I put that accessory from the other cheap indicator, the Tech-Lock. I stuck it on this Brown and Sharp. This Brown and Sharp, it says it's made in Germany, so I'm sure Brown and Sharp is not the manufacturer, that they just branded it. And with a little research I might be able to figure out who made this one. But I just kind of like the way this subdial works on this indicator, so this is one I think I'm going to keep, and this might be one of the ones I decide to send out and have some TLC done to it, because I think that might be worthwhile. You know, I'll do a little research. If I find out that it's not really that great of an indicator, then I might not bother. I might just put it on the block. So we'll set that one aside. All right, so back to the Starretts. So I've got a couple of the more standard Starrett fare here, the 2-inch ones. This one's got I can't quite make it out. Looks like 25 thousandths range. This is the number 25-21, I think. All right, so this does not have much travel at all, but it's got some serious accuracy going for it. Although this is only a thousandths indicator. But this, unlike the Federals, these feel smooth as glass, and there's like virtually no noise coming out of the mechanisms or the movements. Here's another 2-inch one. This one's got a little bit more travel by the looks of it. And this one, again, this is another good candidate to be sent out and have a new crystal or bezel put on it, cleaned up, lubricated. Although this one also, as horrible as it looks, it's operating flawlessly. This has one of these Mighty Mag indicator holders on it. Got a couple of these. This one actually is funny. This one's branded MSC. It's a Chinese knockoff, but I mean literally, talk about a knockoff. It's a carbon copy of the Mighty Mag. So the Mighty Mag is the US made original, and then there's the Chinese cheap knockoff sold through MSC right there. This is a really cool one because it's an extra long travel. This has 4-inch travel. So this is a good example of an indicator that would really work well, you know, just mounted on the ways of the lathe, and you know, this pushing up against the side of the carriage. And I've done that before. With the magnet, it's easy to just slap it on there and go to town. And then I like that idea, so that's why when this came up for sale at the used tool store, I jumped on it. $40, and this should have been probably even more money, except for the fact that it didn't have the original box. And the big problem with this one is someone removed the tab that should have been off the back here. So in other words, originally it would have had a mount on it like that, and for whatever reason they had some reason why they wanted to not have that sticking out the back. But I could make some sort of a mount for this. This one also works really well. This one's a little noisier. I notice these larger ones, they tend to have noisier movements. This one's interesting because if you orient it so that you can read stare it like on the other ones, the actual rod is in the top. Okay? And what's also unusual about this one is this one claims to have half-inch range, but the sub-dial is actually sitting between, well, it looks like it's sitting between 6 and 7, and it doesn't seem to go the full range, so I'm not sure what the deal is with this. This also has a very unusually strong spring. This is the extension rod. I stole it off of one of the cheaper ones because I decided I wanted it. I just stuck it there for good keeping. And this is a nice one. This is a model 656-611, Athol, Massachusetts. This one is 200 thousandths total range. This one has this lever on the side here that you can actually pull this up so that you can slide something underneath it. Like if you had this on a stand on a surface plate, and you could slide something underneath it and then drop it back down onto whatever you want to measure. And I think, if I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure this actual lever right here is actually an extra accessory that didn't originally come with the indicator, that you bought the indicator and then you paid extra for this. And then I have this one here. I think this fell off of, maybe it was this one. I don't recall exactly, but you see this has got, yeah, I'm not positive. I think that came off of one of these larger ones. All right, so that's going to conclude the dial indicators, except for I promised you I would show you the Federal, yeah, that's right, Federal indicator, which in my opinion is probably the most beautiful indicator I've ever laid eyes on. And I'm not necessarily saying that it's high quality or anything like that, but I got to show you this thing, and you can be the judge. All right, so here it is, fellas. This is the Federal indicator. This has got the 3.5-inch dial, I believe, like the other oversized ones. This one, unlike the other boxes, this one has this gold and black label affixed to it that says MicroSure. This is the only Federal indicator I've ever owned or seen that says MicroSure, as opposed to the Miracle Movement, which is on the other ones. The other thing that's very unique about this is the coloring. So there's a like a plastic protective anti-scratch sticker or something on here that I haven't removed. That was on there when I got it. This one is marked Federal, Providence, Rhode Island, USA, MSE1D or MSEID, I'm not sure which, 0.00005. So this is a half 10,000th indicator. That's crazy, right? Needless to say, it doesn't take much to deflect that needle. This one is also marked, as I said, with the microsure, and it's also marked with this name, Peter Schweitzer. Now, I've Googled the heck out of that name, and to no avail, been able to figure out exactly who Peter Schweitzer was. So my thought was, well, maybe this is branded for a particular company. In other words, kind of like how those other ones were like Delco, Remy, or Carrier. Maybe Peter Schweitzer was a manufacturer of something, and Federal made this indicator for them. Or maybe Peter Schweitzer is an individual who worked at Federal and was an engineer or something and is responsible for crafting this. Because this is, as you can see, a very unique indicator. This outer bezel is almost copper colored or rose gold colored. I don't know if you can really appreciate the coloring on this. But I just thought you guys would get a kick out of seeing an indicator like this because, like I said, I don't know if you're going to ever see another one. This would probably be another good question for the good people over at Mara Federal. Maybe I'll give them a call, ask them if they can tell me anything about Peter Schweitzer. Okay, guys, this is going to conclude episode 2, and coming up in episode 3, we're going to do the test indicators. Take care.